Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Happy Dystopian. Today, for the first time in a podcast format, so I'm very excited about that. Not alone this time. As you may or may not know, I am writing a book together with my co-author Chris Wensink, and he is here today to talk, among other things, about our upcoming book titled Regionalizing Eurasia. So, Chris, welcome. Could you perhaps tell us something about what the book is about?
Thanks, Midos. Thanks for having me. How's life?
Yeah, great. Yeah, so enjoying the summertime and so all's good. How about you?
Perfect. Yeah, my shoulder is still a little bit hurting from my second COVID jab I got yesterday afternoon.
Ah,
But
right.
apart from that, doing quite well.
At least you're fully protected now.
Absolutely.
I've yet to get my first shot, but I'm
Okay.
significantly younger than you, of course. So that's.
Well, man is as young as he feels.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, about the book. So I think it's a great topic for two political scientists, originally political scientists, who have then made a shift towards a more corporate environment to shed light on as a sort of personal project. Regionalizing Eurasia. So what we have always seen over the last 5 decades or so is that globalization was always regarded as sort of an unstoppable force of nature. There was the need for more efficiency, there was a need for competition driven innovation, there was a necessity for competition between labor markets, between tax regimes, and the like. Public policy, basically all public policy, domestic but also international policy, was aimed at facilitating globalization. So the opening up of borders, facilitation of free trade, of course, but at the local and regional level, degrees of welfare state spending, a retreat of public services, etc. And on the whole, it's also been called, for instance, a new public management, but a sort of a market thinking in the public sphere, in the public environment. Um,
There is no alternative, right? As Margaret Thatcher famously said.
there is no alternative. Yes, Tina. Yeah, and already in 2007, so that seems like yesterday, but mind you, it's almost 15 years ago, well, 14 years ago, when I was still in political science class. We had this project based on a book written by a Swiss political scientist, Hans-Peter Krisi, and that book basically made the assertion that a new socio-political divide in Western society was emerging, a divide between winners and losers of globalization. So, after the Second World War, the political divides, if you will, were about redistribution and the creation of welfare states. And then you see that from, say, the 1970s onwards, you see that welfare states become more and more of a burden on the public budget, and are gradually, basically until now, continuously being decreased. So what you see is that quite a large share of populations that used to be engaged in blue collar work and the like increasingly find it difficult to make a living, to have be able to pay for a home, to pay for their children's education, and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Like we describe in the book as well, a lot of the blue collar work, the production, has been offshore to low cost locations across the world. So it's one of the most important aspects of globalization. So for a long time there was considered to be no alternative. However, currently we see sort of a retreat of globalization. So Chris, what do you think that will mean for both the winners and the losers out of the equation?
Yeah, yeah. What I think is the main point that we make in the book. Of course, we're making multiple points, but the main point is that moving towards a sort of a new thinking about globalization, in the form or titled regionalization, offers quite a lot of opportunities for tackling issues that have been here for quite a long time, that are associated with globalization. So the argument of regionalization as it is not new, but an important thing to note is that globalization or the globalized economy isn't about to disappear overnight, but sort of a turn towards a more regional footing is happening. So what you see is that, for instance, production costs, particularly labor costs, are leveling out between different regions of the world. So, for instance, the Chinese East Coast, where it used to be called the factory of the world, isn't quite competitive anymore. You cannot produce cheap consumer goods in those areas anymore because it's not competitive anymore.
Exactly. So the wages over there have been increasing at a rapid pace, while the wages in the more industrialized or high income nations have stagnated. So slowly we are moving to a closer level to each other, basically.
Exactly, and don't forget also the mid-income and the upper mid-income nations. Think in the EU, think about Poland, for instance, but there are other examples as well. And then indeed you see that the production from the Chinese East Coast is being moved to countries such as Vietnam or back to the home markets in North America, Europe, but also to West China, or inland China as it is also called, because production there is still competitive. So again, there you see sort of a new dynamic that offers opportunities for creating new jobs in one's own region. But moving production closer to the target market also means that transportation becomes a smaller share of the costs. You have a certain cost that is involved in bringing a product from nothing to basically to the shop.
Yeah.
And transportation, if you have to move your goods across half the globe, then that is a part of that cost. And if you produce close to or at the target market, that is also to be taken into account.
Yeah, so if the labor cost advantage is less great because of this leveling which we discuss, then also in some sectors the transportation costs become more salient, and therefore production closer to the target market becomes more attractive.
Exactly, and emissions also decrease. So, of course, ocean shipping is per kilogram or per ton of cargo the most efficient and and least polluting mode of transport. But on the whole, it's an incredibly polluting business. So you see that things sort of touch each other at base and offer at the same time opportunities to fight climate change, opportunities to provide for better jobs and better paid jobs for one's own citizens and so forth.
Yeah, I think what you have touched upon is, I think, the main purpose of our book, because there has been a lot of talk about the retreat of globalization. Oftentimes it has been mentioned as like a step back, like we're moving backwards into history towards
retreat.
A retreat,
it's
exactly.
Almost like Marxist talk. We have to advance or retreat.
Yeah. We're going back in time, basically, to a scary nationalism. But I think we provide an alternative view on this by stating, okay, we're not going back to a scary nationalism. We are moving forward into a regionalism, which will actually deliver a lot of opportunities to solve existing problems.
Exactly.
And by being aware of this development, you can be at the forefront of making the necessary changes and adapting to thrive in this new situation.
Exactly.
So another topic which you mentioned, which I think is also very interesting here, is the emissions.
Mm-hmm.
So now we are mentioning it basically as like a given. Okay, of course we want to fight emissions, but the ambitions regarding to fighting climate change are huge, both in Europe, in the US, and also in other parts of the world. Could you tell us something about how that will impact the production location and the regionalization of production?
Yeah, like I said, so first of all, moving production closer to the market implies fewer transport kilometers.
Yes.
And therefore less pollution. That's one. But there's also, of course, an element of public thinking. And what you see is the pricing of CO2 emissions.
Exactly, yeah.
That is still not entirely perhaps working as it should be, as a sort of market mechanism. But the thinking is there, the basic intention is there. And that can only be expected to exert a further and an even greater impact in future.
Absolutely, yes.
So that will sort of augment the shift that we already see.
Yeah, exactly. So to expand a bit upon that, for example, in Europe, the ambition is very salient to fight climate change by reducing emissions. And for those reasons, we have very strict rules on multiple sectors, on agriculture, on the production of goods, etc., on limiting emissions in factories.
Mm-hmm.
And if we are really serious about those restrictions, but on the other hand, we are importing a lot of goods which are produced in locations where those rules do not exist, then you are not solving climate change, and at the same time you are destroying your own production economy.
Yeah. That's your reversed mercantilism, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. So you are.
Can you explain that topic?
Yeah, absolutely.
Reversed mercantilism.
So mercantilism, it's a topic from basically the early modern period, in which governments try to protect their own market. By having high barriers to imports.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea is that if you create a barrier towards import, then you create more incentives for creating production in your own country.
Yeah.
So that's a way of fostering your own economy. And what we are seeing now is that there has been an enormous increase in free trade. And also in producing your goods in a lower cost location. However, the reason for those lower costs are also caused by your own regulation. So for example, if you want to produce a pair of jeans in the Netherlands, it would be very expensive because we have a minimum wage, we have a lot of rules about workplace safety, we have higher taxes, so we have a lot of rules to protect both the environment and also the labor force. And that is what makes it expensive, and that is what makes it attractive to source your production offshore.
Yeah.
So in fact, a large part of this globalization is actually driven by a pervasive state power and state influence. Only whereas before, in the times of mercantilism, you were using your laws to protect your home market, now your rules are actually driving away production from your home market. And that is a topic which needs to be seriously addressed if we are serious about both our economy, but also about fighting emissions.
Yeah. So basically, introducing and enforcing standards on CO2 emissions or maximum CO2 emissions associated with production of goods.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So if you match strong regulation with like lax rules for imports, then you are not going to achieve your public goals, and you are also not going to support your own economy.
Exactly.
So that's a problem which is going to become larger in the future because our ambitions are becoming larger as well. So so those are some driving forces which are at work in decreasing globalization. But another important topic, of course, is strategic. I mean, during the pandemic, a lot of countries have noticed that for some basic supplies, for instance, these face masks, a lot of countries were completely reliant on outside countries.
Yeah.
And a lot of leaders have been thinking, okay, but is this a good idea? I mean, right now it's a pandemic. Maybe in a few years there will be another pandemic, or there will be another huge crisis.
Yeah.
And this is really reinforcing the idea of being self-reliant. So those are some of the factors which are driving regionalization of production. And that has a huge impact on all sorts of sectors.
Yes, indeed. But of course, face masks are one thing, but also think about strategic goods, sensitive economic sectors, high tech, military goods, but also what we call dual use goods. So basically goods that can be used for military purposes, but also for other purposes. Those kinds of products are of course already in a number of cases marked as strategic and therefore not to be exported. But what you see is that European countries have basically been slower with implementing stricter regulations there, slower than the United States, that is. That is again a development that will no doubt lead to further the process of regionalization.
Yeah, absolutely. I also think that more and more sectors are being labeled as strategic. I mean, topics such as, of course, the mobile communications network by Huawei.
Yeah.
That has become very contentious, while in the years before it was not seen as a strategic industry.
Yeah.
And it's taking really interesting shapes. For instance, let's talk a bit about the app TikTok, which is very popular among people born during this century, so mostly teenagers who use it to communicate with each other and send videos of them dancing, and even that one has been labeled strategic because TikTok is a Chinese company. The American government doesn't want them to control all the data of its own citizens.
Yeah.
So you're seeing that the range of industries which are strategic is all the time expanding because you can use all sorts of sectors in a strategic way.
Absolutely. And also, you're mentioning TikTok, but think of the internet. We all know, for instance, the Chinese firewall. It is not possible in China to use WhatsApp. It's not possible to use Western news media. Just not possible. It's just being inhibited. And yeah, what is emerging, but perhaps you can add. But what is emerging is an internet of different world regions, sort of the drifting apart of the internet, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because previously, of course, the internet, also known as the World Wide Web, was seen as a global phenomenon, with just a few countries which were authoritarian, which were not going along with the times. They were blocking access for their own citizens to the full internet, and of which the Great Firewall of China is, of course, the most salient example. Which is now also finding other countries who are following China's lead in this regard. But more importantly, the Chinese have really developed their economy in an incredible way. And in many areas of the online world, they have companies which can rival the American companies or even surpass them. Think about companies such as WeChat, but also Alibaba. So the Chinese have built their entire own infrastructure. So it's not that there is a global World Wide Web of which China is taking part more or less, but the Chinese have their own contribution to the whole digital infrastructure.
Yeah.
And another thing which is also happening, which we have seen in the past 5 years thereabouts, is that also in the West we are becoming concerned about the influence which other nations have on our political processes online. So foreign governments are also active on social media, trying to influence election results, or at the very least the public opinion. So those are the developments which are coalescing to create a sort of regionalism in the online sphere as well. I predict that there will be, the internet will split into at least two parts. There will be an American-led part and there will be a Chinese-led part. And maybe there will be some variations on that as well.
And some overlapping and communication
absolutely.
between the two, of course.
Absolutely, yeah. So that's also a core point in our book, that all of these regions will be overlapping. I mean, there will be different blocks for different areas. So for instance, in Europe, we have the European Union, but then a lot of the European Union states are also members of the NATO, which then includes the US and includes Canada. So there will not be a clear-cut conflict between different blocks, but they will overlap and they will become more or less important regarding based on the issue which is at hand.
Yeah, and we think in today's thinking, the natural sort of inclination is to think in terms of competition. Competition between the West and China, competition between the European Union and Russia and so forth. But perhaps we do not know, but perhaps in future, in a more regionalized world, regions might even live more or less apart from each other, with fewer interactions between them than we see today.
Yeah, exactly. Like the relative share of exports between regions will decrease vis-a-vis internal trading, and that will also provide a lot of new opportunities. Looking at China, they have a huge population, which is now currently not at the level of wealth which we know in industrialized countries. So there are huge opportunities to sell to families their first car, their first air conditioning unit, you name it. So a lot of opportunities to grow economically, but also to really make steps forward in terms of human development. So, like we said before, I mean, regionalization is not just a scary thing. It has a lot of great and positive possibilities as well.
Absolutely.
So, when we talk about regionalization, we talk about regionalization for a reason. We don't talk about nationalization. So, why is that?
Yeah, so why not nationalization? Well, the almost all countries in the world, perhaps save for the United States or Russia, due to its large territory. But apart from those countries, there's hardly a country in the world that is able to, you know, produce for itself everything it needs, basically. Within regions, though, there are differences between countries. Some countries are lower cost, lower wage. Those might, for instance, focus on blue collar work. Other countries have highly developed service economies. Those countries may serve as markets for production from slightly lower cost locations within the same region. So that's why you have to be careful with invoking the word nationalization. No, we think that intra-regional trade and also the expansion of intra-regional trade networks and infrastructure networks will become more important. So, take for instance the European Union. We have since some 8 years we have the so-called 10T policy, the Trans-European Network of Transport, which is very much focused on, completing the European transport and particularly railway network. Very important, but its locus is on connecting hinterland markets with the seaports. Not entirely, but that's where the thinking is at.
So it's focused on a globalized world,
Exactly.
basically. Yeah.
Connecting markets in the hinterland with entry points. But what if your production points are also in the hinterland? That means you have intra-regional connections instead of hinterland connections. Well, that is one thing that will come to the fore, we think. And in addition to that, expanding infrastructure, expanding transportation possibilities is also a stimulus for economic growth. So that also provides governments, but especially if we stay at the European Union itself, so the center in Brussels, basically, with an opportunity to direct development. So that means that it's the reshoring and the relocation of production should perhaps not be left entirely to the market, but should also be, mildly steered by governance.
So if I understand correctly, when we move from a globalized to a more regionalized world, it doesn't just mean we're going to do less, like we're going to do less flights, we're going to do less train trips, we're going to do less ocean lines. But what you are saying is that we need to do it differently, and that we are going to develop actually further in that regard.
Well, perhaps we will fly less.
Aha.
Perhaps. I could say I hope so. What I would predict is that intercontinental connections will stay, and those networks will remain rather dense. Probably, or arguably, a little bit less dense than they are now, but this is difficult to predict, but I think there's a case for that. But at the intra-regional level, so regional flights, there is a potential to, at least in part, replace that mode of transport with better international rail connections.
Okay.
As well as high-speed rail connections. And there's lots of work to be done there still to achieve interoperability and smooth connections and so forth. But there's a huge potential for that. Again, also there you could very well think in terms of forms of government steering.
Yeah, absolutely. Also in terms of reducing emissions, it's a game changer, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if we are serious about our ambitions in that regard, I mean that's a no-brainer basically, but easier said than done.
Yes, it's a very intricate thing to improve.
All right, thank you very much. I think the listener got quite a comprehensive picture on what we are working on. I think regionalization is a force which we will all have to deal with, and if you want to be in the driver's seat, you should read our book, right? I mean, that's
Absolutely.
that's basically the solution to all your problems. So related to that, of course, we are at the Happy Dystopian channel, and Chris has also seen some of my videos.
Very good stuff.
Thanks, man. So you also saw the video about Tony Blair dropping metaphorical bombs this time. Did you agree with the former Prime Minister?
Yeah, so what I understood from the video that you made is that what Blair said recently basically is that the Labour Party in Britain, but also the Conservative Party, which is in power, as we know.
We're really enjoying the summer weather here. Huh?
Yeah, we have some thunderstorms in the background, which adds to the gloomy atmosphere.
Exactly. Please continue.
What Blair said is that both of the two main parties in Britain need to turn their eye urgently on basically the people that we've been talking about, the people that have been left behind by globalization, immigration, and things like that. And I think it's obvious that he has a point. What is less obvious is why now. Huh? I mean, things can change. That is clear. When in 2004 the EU admitted 8 new Central East European member states into its ranks, the UK, then ruled by Prime Minister Tony Blair, was amongst the first countries to immediately open up its borders to workers, from immigrant workers from that region. The UK has since and until today is one of the largest receiver countries of Poles, Bulgarians, you name it. And doubtless, I mean, so much is obvious, I think, is that this has contributed tremendously to Brexit. And you can always say, you make an argument whether or not a referendum is a good thing. But the fact is that everybody thought, that referendum, it will pass by, and then it didn't.
Exactly, yeah.
One could say better late than never.
But then, because of the Brexit, there will be probably less immigration into Britain from other European countries. But on the other hand, I'm not sure if the immigration in total will decrease, because perhaps the UK will focus more on their Commonwealth, and got those ties closer. What do you think about that?
Global Britain. it's curious to cut yourself loose from the largest trade bloc, almost the largest trade bloc in the world, just outside your borders, and then pursue all kinds of new trade agreements with other parts of the world. That's curious. We'll see. We'll have to see about that.
Yeah, in my understanding, I understand why the people voted for Brexit, but now we are a few years along. I don't think we should consider it as a success. I mean, there's so many topics which are complicated, and you see that the UK is still very much tied to the EU in all sorts of aspects of trade law, etc. So
yeah.
Absolutely.
I think it will be, I don't know, in 20 years' time that you can say something real about it.
Exactly, yeah. Well, then another topic which I've been talking about quite a lot is the central bank policy, with central banks also including or instituting digital currencies. So just a short recap, the effect of that will be that central banks will be able to carry out monetary policy on an individual level. So I've mentioned a few examples, to have negative interest rates, or to have funds disbursed which can only be used for certain purposes, or which have an expiration date. Well, to me that's a bit dystopian, to refer the name of the channel. How have you looked at that?
Yeah. I understand these are still plans, but plan, at least in Europe, always comes back. So, yeah, apparently in let's say high circles, there is still a lot of thinking going on about how to deal with big banks. That's what I would make of it, because I'm not an economist, so I follow what you tell us in the movie, but what I understand is that this policy of, say, individual accounts for citizens at the central bank will more or less undercut the commercial banks.
Yes.
And what we have seen after the crisis of 2008 is that these banks were too big to fail, that they were not properly regulated, that their top people were sort of stimulated to take unacceptable risks,
and perverse incentives. And,
yes, and since then there have been new regulations, what are they called, the Basel Agreement and so forth. But apparently this is still in high circles a topic of contention, and we'll see.
I fully agree with you that something has to be done, but I'm just a bit worried that we are creating we're moving from a few system banks which are too big to fail to one huge institution, the European Central Bank, which would then also, of course, be too big to fail.
Yeah.
And then there's the question of, will we have enough democratic oversight of this institution to prevent problems which have arisen with these other system banks? Yeah. Or would a solution be to decentralize further and to make sure that these big system banks are split up into smaller banks to foster more competition? But I think this is a very classic left-wing, right-wing, statist, libertarian discussion. That's,
Germany has a lot of these small regional banks,
Yeah.
But they're in big trouble, I understand. They're not healthy at all. So, whether or not smaller banks will be better fitted for these circumstances, I don't know.
Yeah. It remains an interesting discussion, and I'm really glad that you are taking also a different point of view from me, because the main thing that I want to reach is that there is discussion about these topics. And right now I feel that because the topic is too complex or not interesting enough, it's not sexy, we're not talking about it. While these discussions, I think, are very fundamental towards the future of both Europe and also our economy.
Definitely.
So that's
There's a reassertion going on of the state, and in the case of the European Union, of the common institutions, at the expense of market forces. That is clear, and that will in some way play out. But what is there public oversight over big system banks? I don't think so. So it's just for me these are questions.
Absolutely. I mean, I hope the last word hasn't been spoken about this.
Yeah.
And then something which happened last week, the issue surrounding Hungary with their new law on promoting of homosexuality and transgenderism to kids, which is going to be outlawed. And what I think is mostly interesting about that is the response by the Western European powers, which with also our own Prime Minister Mark Rutte saying, okay, if you want to be like that, you shouldn't be in the European Union. To me, it was very dangerous, basically, because as we mentioned also in relation to the book, we really need Central and Eastern Europe as the European Union. And if you see that also Hungary is being supported by Poland, Slovenia, Slovakia, and also Bulgaria, I mean, I don't think we can stand to lose all of them. I mean, what's your opinion on that topic?
Well, maybe first of all, this show that we saw in Brussels is perhaps also a bit of a show of powerlessness on the side of West European countries. Well, we know indeed there are regional differences, but within the EU, and Central and Eastern Europe is largely still a conservative society. I don't think that will change. We've seen a couple of years ago the same thing with the refugee or the refugee crisis, where it was ultimately pushed to by a qualified majority decision in Brussels that all countries should be obliged to take in refugees or immigrants. And these countries in Eastern Europe or Central Eastern Europe, they will simply never do it. That's my idea.
Yeah.
They will never accept a diversification of their populations in the same way as we've seen it in Western Europe. Of course, they have their own demographic problems.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean,
but they don't see the refugee or immigration topic as a solution for that.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same with this LHBT, I think it's called, discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's also a more fundamental discussion, perhaps, like, do you want to keep all of the European states together? Or are you happy to lose a few if then you can integrate faster, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I think the membership of the UK, of the EU, was really putting the brake on some of the more integrating measures. And now that they are out, it is easier to move ahead. And I think that will be a discussion in the future as well. Do we go fast or do we stick together?
Yeah, the Europe of different speeds. Indeed, the UK, mind you, it's the second largest economy, or it was the second largest economy, and also the second largest population that left the EU. I can't see that as a simple accident. It's much more fundamental than that.
Yeah. Yeah, so also I think contentious issue on which the last has not been said yet.
Yeah.
Right, Chris. So thank you very much for joining me today. I think we discussed a lot of topics. So
Well, thanks for having me.
yeah. So let's leave it at that. To everybody listening, stay sane, and I will see you next week.